everyone. So this month I wanted to give you some tips on creating painted flower images. And there's so many ways to do this, but I have tried a variety of things over the years and taken several courses, and I want to just give you some of my tried and true tips that work. Now, I'm not going to go into complete detail on every step. I'm going to really just give you some ideas to get started, and I do have some other videos that I'll reference. So the first step that you always want to take is to make sure that your image, your flower, has appropriate brightness, that your exposure is good, and that you've cleaned up your image. And with cleanup, what I mean is if you look at this image before, this was a beautiful white dahlia that I had grown in my garden, but it was starting to fade and it had been eaten up a little bit, had a lot of black spots. White flowers in the garden can be hard for that. And also had some eaten leaves. This was late in the season, and so I've used the spot heal tool and the clone tool to go in and clean up my flower, as well as the leaves around it. Now I have an entire video that's posted on the YouTube channel that walks you through how to clean up an image and various tools to do that. But I'm going to do a few more things on this image to show you. So I've got my blank layer and I've got my clone tool, and I've just been going around, and as I zoom in, I'm just doing cleanup. It's also an opportunity if you have strong shadows or areas that you feel you need to correct. Now, the reason that you want to do this is because when you add the paint effects, it will really showcase any spots on your image, and that's going to make it just really challenging after you add the painting techniques. So I'm just going to continue to go around, and I'm just double checking this image. Now this petal right here has been a little cut off, and it is in the top part of the image, and I'm going to go ahead and fix that now. And I think the easiest way to do that is going to be to use the clone tool. So I'm going to come over and click the option, and I'm just going to start rebuilding this edge of this petal. And my opacity, I'm going to take it up to 90%. You have to double check your opacity on your brush, especially if you've been doing other things. So just want to come in, and then now I'm going to try to just smooth it so that it really matches the rest of that petal. And I think that's going to be pretty good. There we go. So it did a nice job. You can continue to kind of clone over it and make sure you've got it smooth. We're going to be adding painting, so I'm not too worried about it, but I did want to smooth it out a little bit. And then I'm just going to check to see if there are any other areas like that. We also have a little bit of a torn petal up here, and I think I'm just going to try to smooth this edge just so it doesn't look torn off. So just kind of coming in and smoothing that out a little bit. I could also try to smooth the top of this petal, just kind of coming around and smoothing that out a little bit. All right, let's go ahead and clean up the top of this. Maybe just rounding it just a little bit. There we go. So you can just use the clone tool to do that. I don't see anything over here on the bud, so I think we're okay. So again, I'm going to show you before. You can see all those spots, and I had a torn area down here, and the after. So again, I've got another video that walks you through a multitude of ways to clean up your image. Now, the next thing you want to do, if you haven't already, is make sure that your exposure is really nice. Now, I do have some area here that's not as bright as the top. I also want to make sure that the center is really bright. And I've also got a little bit of blue in this area. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do a selective color adjustment, and I'm going to go to the blues, and I'm going to see what happens if I take the cyan down. So that is definitely removing the cyan, but I also don't want any magenta. So I'm going to bring both of those down, and man, I can immediately see a difference in the image, and it's not impacting the greens at all. So I can show you before and after. You can see what a difference that makes. Now, while I'm in here, I'm going to select the yellow, and there is some yellow in the center of this image, and I'm just going to increase that a little bit to really make that yellow stand out. Okay, that also got rid of a little bit of the blue that was over here, but I still have this pink that we're going to have to work on in a minute. Okay, so we did our selective color adjustment. The next thing I want to do is add just a little bit of brightness, and I have a secret trick for that. You come down to where you can do a plus to add a new layer, and you want to hold down the Option key. That's going to give you this menu. Then you want to select Soft Light, and then you want to fill with Soft Light Neutral Gray. So again, it's the plus, but you hold the Option key, and you get that menu. That's going to give you a 50% gray soft light layer. Now we can come over and with our white paint and a brush, and only at about 20% opacity, flow, you can kind of gauge where you want that. We can come in and add some really soft brightness to our image. And the beauty of this is you're not doing anything destructive to your image, and it's very gentle brightening. So I'm just going to come around and add that in some spots, because when we add the paint, it can sometimes darken your image, but we also just want to make sure that our flower is really popping and standing out. All right, so I'll show you that before and after. It's very subtle. Now I also notice a little tear on this bloom down here, and so before we start painting, I want to go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to go back to that layer, and I'm just going to grab the clone and come over, and I'm just going to blend that in. Now that is too much because I'm at 90% opacity, and in this case it's not working. So I'm going to take my opacity down to maybe 30%, and I'm going to come in really slowly and just start filling that in. So sometimes, you know, what you do doesn't work and you have to just adapt. But I do want to fill that in. And that's probably better. Still a little bit bright. So I think what I'm going to do is I'll go up to this. I'm going to flip it to black at 10%. Go back to our brush, and I'm just going to darken that just a little bit. So you can do the reverse effect. Now, I don't want to go that far, so let me go back. Just going to add just a little bit there. And I'm not loving that. It's really bothering me, but I'm going to leave it for now. I think when we go to paint that it's going to turn out okay, and we're not going to see that spot. I'm going to continue to see spots that I'm going to want to play with. This flower was really dirty, and as we brighten that white, I can see some more of the spots. I could also actually try that right here, but no, that's not working either. So I'm going to leave this spot alone for now and just let it go, and we'll see what happens once we have our paint. Okay, so you just want to continue to move through your image, check everything out. So now we did our spots, we did some selective color to really balance the color, and we did some brightening to the image. So the next step is to deal with your background. And for this image, the only thing I'm really concerned about is I have this spot, because I do want to keep some of this background, but I am going to crop it. So this is also when you could decide that you want to maybe crop your image if you haven't already done that. So I just want this to be pretty much a true square. So I'm just going to bring it in and do that kind of center crop. And then this allows me to see what else I have that I need to fix in my background. So I do have this area with this one pink flower. So I'm going to go ahead and add another blank layer. And I'm going to go ahead and label this one background so I know what I'm working with. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to grab my clone, and I'm probably going to take the opacity up to about 80%. You can click the number 8 on your keyboard. And I'm just going to probably take the Option key and get my target and match it to that green. And then I'm going to come around here and target again, and I'm just going to blend that away. And now we never know that that little pink spot was there. The next thing that I want to get rid of is this stem up at the top. So this I'm going to have to do with a smaller clone. And I'm just going to come in really small, and I'm just going to start cloning that away. And you have to really take your time sometime with the clone tool like that. And I want to come over with it is usually the best way to go. And just blend that in. And once we add our paint, you're never going to know that stem was there. I also don't like this stem right here, so I'm just going to soften that one. Again, just moving the clone tool over. Now we got a spot of white, so I'm going to do Command Z to undo. And it's going to pick that up. So you've got to make your clone really small and make sure your Option key is, your target is that cross line. You just want to make sure that's up there at the top. And I also don't really like that little area. So I'm just cleaning up the background, just making sure that it is ready to go. All right, so that's all better. I don't see anything else in the background. This little flower here is just a little bit bright, but I think at the end, I'm probably going to darken the background some, so I'm not going to worry about that right now. And we are ready now to start our painting technique. So let me jump over to another image and show you how I adjusted for the background. So this is an image that I cleaned up all the spots. I worked on the color a little bit. And then what I wanted to do was remove these blobs of color so that I really have a standout image without these blobs. And the way I did that was making a selection. So I'll show you that really quick. Let me go ahead and duplicate this layer. So I went up to select and I did select subject. And what I'm trying to do now is create this mask. And it did a pretty good job, but it missed the stem. So what I'm going to do is add my quick selection tool, make sure I'm on the plus, and I'm going to just drag down to get that rest of that stem there. And I want to make sure that it's open. Now, sometimes your flower image, your selection tool will not work this neatly, and you'll have to go in and do select and mask. But for this instance, it did a really nice job. But what I want to do is I want to work on the background, not the flower. So I'm going to go back to select and click invert or inverse. Now the area around the flower is impacted. What I'm going to do next is grab my dropper tool. I'm going to select this green color and maybe get this kind of in-between color. It's now my foreground. I'm going to grab my brush, and what I'm going to do is come in and I want to increase my opacity. I can increase my brush size, and I can start painting in the green. And I can go all the way around this flower and not touch it. So that's how you can greatly impact the background of your image. And you can get in here really close and not impact it. You can also change your intensity. So if you don't want your flow so high, and of course if you want this a little bit lower, you can also change the color as you go. So I can go back to my color picker, I can grab this light green, go back to my brush, and I can add that lighter color, and I can just come around and even just click it in to just add some of that brightness and really make the areas that are a little bit darker just all blend and stand out. So this is a great, easy way. Just remember that you do your selection and then you invert it, and you can work then around your image. And then when you're done, you can click Command D and it gets rid of that selection. So I'll show you the one that I did earlier, and there it is. So working on your background is the second step. You want to make sure that it's cleaned up and ready to go. So if we go back to our dahlia here, we went through all of those steps. We've got our step 1 was clean up. Step 2 is really making sure that we've got our background ready to go. And then step 3 is starting to paint. So now that we've got all of this work done on this image, what I want to do is a command called Shift, Option, Command, Shift, and the letter E. And what that's going to do is give you a stamped layer. This is a command that you should write down. It's Command or Control, Option, Shift, and the letter E. It's going to give you a stamped layer. And that means everything we've done up till now is in this one clean new layer. And so this is where our painting is going to begin. Now there's several ways that we can paint this image, but I'm going to show you some of my favorite tools to do it. Under Select and Filter, and you've got Stylize, there's Oil Paint. And Oil Paint is a great way to start with giving your image a painterly look. I like to keep all of my brush, cleanliness, bristle, everything over to the far right and keep my light to the far left. Click OK, and it's going to give us this gorgeous soft finish. And then you can adjust the opacity on that and make your modifications. So that's an easy, quick way. I'm going to go back and I want to go back to that stamp. The other way is I use Topaz Studio 2. I like to go to Filter, Topaz Studio 2, and there's a couple options that I really love. Now the first is going to be under the looks. I like to use fur and feathers. And fur and feathers is going to give you tons of detail. Now I usually keep the opacity a little bit lower. And what I'm going to do is apply, and this is where if we had a lot of blemishes, they would really show up. I'm going to click accept, and it's going to take it back into Photoshop. Now what I can do is I can actually change the opacity of it here in Photoshop. So I can bring it down where I want it. I could also apply a mask and mask it off. So I'm going to go ahead and call this one fur and feather because I know that that's what I did to this part of the image. Can't type today. So if I wanted to add a mask to this layer, I could do that. I could also invert the mask, Command I. I can grab a white brush and let's make this brush a little bit smaller. And maybe I just want to apply this technique in the center and maybe some of these center lines, but I want to keep the rest of this flower maybe a little bit softer. And let's take the opacity up now. And we can really see those details, but I want it to fade. So I'm not going to have it everywhere, and maybe just a little bit right here on the bud. So you have options when you use this, and then you can continue to modify the opacity, bring it down a little bit if you want. So now what I'm going to do is I'm making a duplicate of this, Command J. I'm going to delete the mask because I don't need that layer mask. And I'm going to take it back now to Topaz. I'm going to show you a couple other fun options. So another look that we can add is we can come down, and there's several of these that are beautiful, and it really depends on the subject. So Buzz Sim Split Tone is really nice, and it gives you a vignette to your image, and it just gives a little bit of extra softness. So that's one that you can play with. I also like Happy Little Trees. It's also going to be, again, at 50%. It's just going to soften, and you've already got your detail, but it's just giving you that soft look. Melting can also be really nice, and it does have more lines, so you have to decide if that is what works for your subject. Some flowers have more texture in them anyway. Morning Mist is another favorite, and that one is going to give some texture and just some fun details. So it really depends on what you are going for with your flower. So I think for this one, I really want to keep it soft, and I think I'm going to do Buzz Sim Split Tone, and I'm going to apply it, but there's a trick here. There's a vignette at the top, and the vignette is colored white. I want to change it to a dark because I did like the dark green. So I'm actually going to darken the vignette, and I'm going to increase it. I'm going to reduce the size a little bit. So that's what's great about Topaz is you can really modify even a look. So I want to strengthen that vignette, I want it nice and round, and I think I'm good with that. And I love the softness that it gave our flowers, so I'm going to click accept. It's going to take it back into Photoshop. And now what I can do is decide about the opacity. I can take it up to that 100%. I can also bring it down a little bit, and I could brush it off if I wanted. So again, if I wanted to mask it a little bit, I could grab a black brush and maybe take the opacity down 24% and just maybe take a little bit off of it in certain places. Maybe I don't want as much in this center, and there we go. Now, if you're wanting some more softness or maybe detail to the petals, this is where we could do at this point another stamped layer, Command, Option, Shift, and the letter E. Now we've got a stamped down layer, and I could go back and I could go to Stylize, Oil Paint. Again, I'm going to let it run the way I have it set up. Click OK. You can see it softened the flower even more. But I'm going to add a mask. I'm going to invert it, flip it to white, and probably about a 50% opacity. And I'm just going to add some of that oil paint to my background, just to really soften it even more and give it more of that painted look. Now, as I'm now working on this image, I see another background area that we missed before, and this is going to happen. So you can see this white area over here. So at this point, I would have to decide if I wanted to go in and fix that. I could do it with the clone tool. It's just going to take a little bit of work. So it's something where now that we've got the image pretty much set, I could do another stamped layer, and I could come in and work with the clone tool to clean that up. So that's going to happen. Just be aware of that. So this is one way that you could edit in a really creative way. Now there's some other options. I'll go over to this image, and for this image we could add a texture, which would be really nice for the background. But I want to work on these petals a little bit and bring out some detail. So the first thing I'm going to go ahead and do, let me make sure that we've got a nice stamped layer. So Command Option Shift and the letter E. I'm first going to do that Topaz filter for fur and feathers because I want to bring out some of this great detail. So I'm going to do this really fast. And we'll come down here, and I'm just going to do it at about 50%. Remember, we can reduce it in Photoshop. So I'm going to click Accept. And that is pretty heavy, so I am going to take it down just to where it's bringing out that detail and pop, and it's adding a little bit of the lines there. I can continue to modify it. All right, so we know that this is our topaz layer, so I'm going to make a note of that. And now I'm going to just Command J to duplicate that. And this I'm just going to call Paint because I just want to know that I'm going to start painting it. Okay, so here in Photoshop, you have some other tools that are available, but you have to go to Mode and change your image to 8 bits. It's not going to impact your color or anything about your file size. It's just the way that it allows you to use these artistic tools. So then we're going to come over to Filter, Artistic, and we've got lots of options. So I'm going to start over. It's going to open this menu for us, and this is where we've got incredible options available that are just going to do some fun things to our image. Now, you can see the intensity, the texture. This is the watercolor. Now, remember, we do not have to do these at full strength. So I'm also going to go and let's look at this rough pastels. There's sponge, which is really fun. Can give like that really soft painted look. There's also brush strokes that you can do. So splatter is nice. Rough pastels can be fun. That one is definitely much more painterly. Now here's where you can change the stroke length, so you can make it really small, and you can also modify your canvas with this. So if you want just a really small, tiny canvas, and the relief on that so that it's not as noticeable. It's also adding light. So for this image, I probably want to add the light to the top and not the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to try this just so that you can see it. I'm going to click OK. And so it's brought it back. So we can see now the before and the after. It was very subtle, but it's also adding some texture on our background, which I like. I think it's pretty. But we could add a mask to this and maybe even just invert it and go to our brush. We've got our white paint. And now we could just add that softness and brush it on where we want it. And can take that opacity up. We can just brush in those paint strokes. So that is another option. Always masking and applying it yourself can really help you customize it. Maybe you don't really want it all over the background, or you just want it at a really low opacity. And I think for this flower, really don't need to do a lot more. I do like the painted, but I might want to add a texture to it. So I'm going to go ahead and get my stamped layer again, Command Shift Option E. I'm going to go to My Files, and I've got some editing tools, and I'm going to go to my textures, and I love these flypaper textures, and there's some that have some really pretty green, and I think that could look really nice. So let me make this a little bit smaller, and I am just going to drag and drop this right in and drag it over. And this is a way to put kind of that final touch on your image. I'm going to go to Soft Light. I like to try it first and take the opacity down. And I like it's added that texture. I want to make sure that it's not impacting the color in my image too much. So I'm going to add a mask, make sure it's on black, and probably 90% opacity. I want to take the texture off the center of this flower because it is bleeding the color, and I want to keep that gorgeous blue tones. And then you can flip it using the X key and kind of come around and just make sure that you're blending it around the edges of that mask. Okay, so that was another option. Adding a texture can be fun. You can also alter if I wanted to change this green color a little bit. I could also try different blend modes. So hard light's going to be different. Screen is going to be super soft and light. Multiply if we wanted to darken it. We could also do normal, and then I would have to absolutely mask it. So I think soft light works best in this case. And then to make some final adjustments to the image, I could work on selective color, especially if I want to modify these greens just a little bit. Maybe pulling down the yellows, and even I could either darken or brighten just a little bit. Either way, you could either go darker with it or you could brighten the greens a little bit. Kind of like that dark. So many different options, but the trick is to really follow those steps and to think about going through and getting your image really prepped and ready, making sure your exposure's good, background's good, and then adding those fun painter techniques. So I hope you had fun trying some really painterly, impressionistic flower images this spring.